St. Petersburg, June 3rd, 1800. A strange letter arrived at the State Council of the Empire. Daria Georgievna, the widowed queen of King Erekle, categorically demanded that the royal throne of Kartli-Kakheti and all mechanisms of Georgian state governance be preserved. The letter had been preceded by another event. Probably for the first time in Georgia's history, Russia, through the efforts of its representative, Baron Karl Noring, commander-in-chief in the Caucasus, and its agents, conducted a so-called referendum in eastern Georgia in 1799. Noring put two questions to Georgian society: whether Georgia was capable of existing independently, and whether everyone wished to unite with Russia.
The State Council viewed the widowed queen's ambition as an ominous sign. Daria Georgievna made these statements at a time when George XII, King of Kartli-Kakheti, was extremely accommodating and loyal toward Russian policy.
The Russian authorities did not overlook Darejan's attitude, Queen Darejan's attitude, toward the so-called referendum conducted by Noring. Naturally, they did not leave her letter unanswered either. One might say that from that point onward, Darejan became unequivocally unacceptable to the authorities of Imperial Russia.
Noring's report said that the kingdom of Kartli-Kakheti neither feared existing independently nor wished to abolish the throne.
Emperor Paul I found himself facing an unexpected reality. The Russians had encountered a rather bold opposition in Georgia, and that opposition was active. Queen Darejan stood at the center of the opposition's political activity. Daria Georgievna is an intriguer, the emperor was told. Remove Noring from affairs of state, Paul I declared.
2 years later, General Noring would pay the price for this letter and for the ineffective steps he had taken. The empire realized that its agents had failed to do their job properly.
It was an extremely difficult period, and the role of Darejan, the queen, in all of this is very interesting. She took an anti-Russian position, and apparently a very sound and correct one. The issue is not whether Darejan understood and assessed the geopolitical situation as a politician better than Erekle or anyone else. Even if we assume that she understood it merely by instinct, that does not matter. Her position was unequivocally correct. The authorities of Imperial Russia clearly saw this, while Georgians themselves began to recognize it soon after the Treaty of Georgievsk was signed.
The first disagreement within the Georgian royal family over the Russian question arose between Erekle and Darejan. At that time, preparations for the Treaty of Georgievsk began in this very palace. Erekle's personal physician was German. Interpreters were available to receive diplomatic missions from both the East and Europe. Erekle's children were taught foreign languages in this palace, with particular priority given to Persian, Russian, and Italian.
My lord and king, with this treaty you have destroyed the kingdom of Georgia. These words belong to Queen Darejan. Russian politicians and foreign scholars would quote them repeatedly in monographs and newspaper articles. That is how historiography preserved the statement.
The queen wielded considerable influence at the royal court. Several reforms attest to her influence over the processes taking place in the kingdom. Erekle changed the law of succession, and the queen had a hand in it. Darejan bends Erekle to her will, their contemporaries would say.
Under the new law of succession, the crown would no longer pass from father to son, but from brother to brother and, eventually, to the sons of the eldest brother, and so forth. Naturally, this law created grounds for serious confrontation among members of the three branches of the family, including Erekle's heirs. People said that Darejan bent Erekle to her will. In reality, she did not. Erekle listened to Darejan because, first of all, he loved her, and secondly, he saw that she was a highly intelligent woman.
The rule of succession at the royal court was changed. Unfortunately, we never saw how that arrangement would have developed, because Russia annexed the country and abolished the monarchy in Georgia. No one knows whether the change would ultimately have affected the royal court positively or negatively, but altering the established order was a very serious act.
George is a weak monarch. Prince Yulan is bolder, people at court thought. The idea of placing Yulan on the throne came from Darejan.
A sizable faction of Darejan's supporters shared this position.
In my personal view, Georgian historiography, and Georgian society in general, has treated Queen Darejan wrongly and unfairly. Even now, there are online publications listing the worst Georgian queen or the worst Georgian woman, and Queen Darejan is mentioned among them. That is completely unjust. In summary, she truly was a talented and perceptive woman. She had received the education appropriate for a woman of that period. Of course, we know that this was a feudal society. On the other hand, we can see that she held very sound views on critical and important issues, including relations with Russia. That also speaks in her favor as a queen.
In 1800, 2 years after ascending the throne, King George asked the empire to introduce the Russian legal system into the Georgian kingdom. He sent Georgian envoys to St. Petersburg with this request.
The year 1800 proved decisive. Russian policy was steadily taking hold throughout the Caucasus. Among the numerous members of the Bagrationi family, those who, together with the Queen, openly held an anti-Russian position in that fateful year of 1800 when abroad. Prince Alexander was among them.
The Queen sensed the real danger that the throne would be abolished.
To a vigilant and intelligent woman like Darejan, it was clear that the policies of George XII would ultimately lead the kingdom of Kartli-Kakheti to ruin. Her reaction was naturally very harsh and unequivocal, further intensifying the confrontation between her and George XII. On the one hand, this disturbed the internal political situation in Kartli-Kakheti. On the other hand, considering the threat Russia posed to the kingdom at that time, her actions were very logical, politically sound, and correct. Ultimately, all of this led George XII to isolate Darejan and effectively hold her captive.
George XII forbade his stepmother from communicating with foreigners, placed her under house arrest, confiscated her estates, and transferred them to his own wife. Darejan's house arrest caused a bitter dispute among the princes, and the brothers openly confronted one another.
On November 7, 1800, here on the field of Niahura, two brothers drew up their forces against each other. On one side stood Prince Alexander, backed by Omar Khan and Iranian units. On the other stood King George XII with the Russian army. The battle lasted only 3 hours and ended in King George's victory. Prince Alexander was defeated. Afterward, the Queen was placed under the strictest surveillance.
King George died on the 50th day after the Battle of Niahura. 20 days after his death, on January 16, 1801, the Georgian kingdom's symbols of investiture, the crown, scepter, and sword, were taken to St. Petersburg under armed escort by order of the emperor. This already meant that the throne had been abolished. On March 16, 1801, exactly 2 months after these events, Emperor Paul I was assassinated. His son, Alexander I, ascended the throne.
After King George's death, it became practically clear that Imperial Russia intended to abolish the kingdom of Kartli-Kakheti. This was evident even to Prince David, the lawful heir to the throne, who was also a general in the Imperial Russian army. He understood that no one was going to hand him the royal throne. He removed his uniform and returned it to the Russian Empire. In principle, this meant that he, too, joined Darejan's group in seeking to preserve the independence of the kingdom of Kartli-Kakheti. In 1801, Alexander I's manifesto declared the kingdom of Kartli-Kakheti abolished.
The entire Bagrationi royal family rose against the manifesto of 1801. A temporary commission for the study of the affairs of the Georgian royal family was established within the empire's Ministry of Internal Affairs.
To simplify matters, the empire chose an entirely unambiguous strategy: to remove every single Bagrationi from Georgia. If any member of the royal family resisted this measure, the imperial administration was authorized to use force against them.
It was perfectly clear that once the kingdom of Kartli-Kakheti had been abolished, the presence of the princes, and especially Darejan, who had emerged as a leader, could not be tolerated. Apart from being Erekle's wife, she was also a leader in her own right. Her sons were the princes who actively fought the authorities of Imperial Russia. Under those conditions, Queen Darejan's presence in Kartli-Kakheti was a constant threat to Russia.
On September 8, 1802, the emperor granted special powers to Pavel Tsitsianov, a Russian general of Georgian origin. He arrived in Georgia with the status of commander-in-chief. Tsitsianov was expected to correct the mistakes of his predecessor, General Nori.
Tsitsianov approached the task of removing the Bagrationi family from their homeland with great enthusiasm. The central part of this effort was to strip the Bagrationis of their property.
The Russified Tsitsianov used every means available to carry out Imperial Russia's order to remove members of the royal family from Georgia. For this purpose, he confiscated the prince's property. He hoped that this would force them to leave for Russia promptly. After this decision, Tsitsianov effectively left the princes and other members of the royal family without any means of subsistence.
I know that you are gracious, and that is why I dared to make this request. I ask you to grant me a little rice and a bowl of clarified butter. Perhaps I, too, may someday be able to repay the favor. Miriam, a daughter of Erekle, wrote to the family of a police officer she knew.
The agent sent a letter to St. Petersburg. The Queen is the center around which intrigues are woven. Now even those Bagrationists who were previously our supporters are dissatisfied.
Under these circumstances, Emperor Alexander I invited Darejan to St. Petersburg, supposedly for reconciliation, and promised her new estates in Russia in exchange for the ancestral lands that had been confiscated from her.
Imperial Russia identified its problem very clearly and correctly. Its first and greatest problem was Darejan. Darejan as the leader, one might say, of the anti-Russian sentiment. When Alexander I issued his manifesto and abolished the independence of the Kingdom of Kartli, it was immediately and inherently understood that no member of the royal family could be allowed to remain in Georgia. In Kartli-Kakheti, in this case. How could such a thing have been imaginable?
I shall use every means at my disposal to drag Queen Darejan out of Georgia.
In 1750, Darejan Dadiani, a descendant of the rulers of Samgrelo, was introduced to King Erekle in Sarami. Darejan was 15 years old at the time. Erekle was captivated by the young woman and soon married her. She was Erekle's third wife. Erekle loved his queen. Erekle and his wife shared a very warm relationship. Despite their age, they preserved to the very end the love they had shared from the beginning. According to tradition, whenever he approached his wife, he would melt like a wax candle, and he treated her with great tenderness. It is even said that whenever he found her alone in the corridors, he would caress her there as well.
When Darejan arrived at the palace, the future King George was 4 years old. Later, during the period of their strained relationship, the Queen would tell George, "I loved you like my own son. I did not devote as much care to any of my own children as I did to you."
January 10th, 1803. Tsitsianov wrote to the emperor, "Darejan has refused to come to St. Petersburg, using illness as a pretext. I am leaving for her residence immediately, so that I may carry out your order and remove her from the house by force."
At that moment, Tsitsianov had been assigned the task of governing Kartli-Kakheti. Solving this problem was his responsibility and a serious challenge, because it was one of the first major problems he faced. He tried every possible method to remove the princes and Darejan. He confiscated their property, practically leaving them homeless and hungry. It must be said that this was an extremely difficult period for members of the royal family.
Tsitsianov visited the queen at the palace in Mukrani. She received him with swollen legs and a body covered in sores.
If you manage to travel from Tbilisi to Mukrani, you will manage to travel to St. Petersburg as well. If you manage to travel from Tbilisi to Mukrani, you will manage to travel to St. Petersburg as well.
Tsitsianov forced the queen to lift her dress so that he could see her diseased legs with his own eyes.
This was unprecedented insolence on Tsitsianov's part. Even after becoming convinced that the elderly queen was ill, he would not relent. After all, Tbilisi is only about 40 kilometers from Mukrani, while the distance from Mukrani to St. Petersburg is 2,710 kilometers.
The queen's fate was sealed. Meanwhile, the agents uncovered new evidence against her. Prince Alexander, irreconcilably opposed to Russia, was secretly corresponding with his mother.
"I must tear out their roots. Darejan tormented me for more than 9 months, but in the end, I resorted to the only means that works so powerfully on Asians: fear and coercion. It worked."
The correspondence shows very clearly how fiercely Tsitsianov was trying to take her away by every possible means. Even his tone is evident in the letters, as is his deeply negative attitude toward Darejan.
On November 25th, 1803, The 70-year-old queen departed Mukrani for St. Petersburg together with her escorts.
Her removal was profoundly dramatic. For example, 500 moneti were officially allocated for 20 people, although in reality there were 40 people in the party, with still others beyond those 40. The money was supposed to cover their food and the Queen's journey. In reality, not even enough money was allocated to transport the Queen to Russia in a proper manner.
From Ananuri, the elderly Darejan was taken deep into the Daryal Gorge tied to a cart. Only a few months earlier, Queen Miriam, wife of George XII, had likewise been taken out of Georgia tied to a cart. The Russian administration accused her of causing a general's death. Thus humiliated and insulted, the last queens of Kartli-Kakheti left Georgia.
People came out, stopped, and bid her farewell as though saying goodbye to a symbol of Kartli-Kakheti, a symbol of independence. They saw her not merely as King Erekle's wife, but as the leader of the group that had fought for the independence of Kartli-Kakheti. Although uprisings would continue afterward, Darejan's departure for Russia brought an important and deeply symbolic stage to an end.
This village in the Daryal Gorge is called Kaishori. It was here that several Highlanders secretly managed to meet Queen Darejan. They had a plan. At dawn, they could destroy the Russian escort, abduct the queen, and take her into the mountains. Queen Darejan rejected the proposal. She knew exactly how harsh and brutal the Russian Empire's revenge against the Highlanders could be. She therefore continued toward Mozdok with her entourage.
Mozdok, November 1803. Protopopov, the commandant of Mozdok, reported to Tsitsianov. At 6 o'clock in the evening on November 18th, Queen Darejan arrived in Mozdok with her attendants. I did not allow them into the city. I stopped them in a place where neither people nor buildings could be found. They spent the night in a carriage. The Queen was told that these were the quarantine regulations. For 6 days, I subjected them to as much fumigation and smoke as I could. Only afterward did I allow them into the city.
Is this damned quarantine the same everywhere else?
Because of the merciless way the quarantine was carried out, I no longer know what to tell you, my queen.
After an arduous journey lasting 8 months, the Queen arrived in St. Petersburg on May 28, 1804. The accounts from St. Petersburg form a long saga in which the Queen had to address the state administration with the humblest possible petition over every minor matter.
By your life, this is 1 month's portion from my own provisions. It is what I have sent to you in Ulan. I tried in every possible way, but I could not obtain anything more from anywhere.
Imperial Russia's response to Darejan's negative attitude was to spread negative stories about her while she was still alive. An information campaign against Darejan began immediately. It was not limited to propaganda. There were also concrete acts of persecution, the confiscation of property, isolation, and so forth. The campaign to blacken her name began at once and was later enthusiastically embraced during the Soviet period.
St. Petersburg, November 6, 1807. The cold weather had set in. St. Petersburg's damp climate aggravated the Queen's ulcerated body. That morning, birds were carried past the house for sale. The Queen had a servant buy a cage filled with birds. She opened the window, opened the cage door, and released the birds one by one.
Our captivity is enough. At least you should be free, she said, and cast the cage aside. Then she entered her room, lay down, and died several hours later.
The Emperor had Darejan buried with royal honor and dignity. Her grave is at the Alexander Nevsky Monastery. She is buried beside Prince Vakhtang.